Love that was never supposed to happen often begins quietly, without drama, as an internal shift rather than an external event. It does not arrive because circumstances invited it, but because something within the individual was already prepared to receive it. This kind of love emerges from the unconscious layers of the mind, where unspoken needs, unresolved emotional patterns, and forgotten hopes quietly shape perception. When such love appears, it feels less like falling and more like remembering, as though a familiar truth has resurfaced after a long absence. The person who becomes the object of this love may not be extraordinary in a visible sense, yet they carry a symbolic weight that stirs what has been dormant. This is why the experience feels inevitable and unsettling at the same time. The conscious mind may protest, listing reasons, rules, and consequences, but the inner world responds with a depth of emotion that logic cannot silence. The love exists before it is understood, and that is what makes it so disorienting. At its core, this love is not merely about the other person, it is about an inner encounter. The individual is confronted with parts of themselves that have remained unseen or unlived, now awakened through the presence of another. This is why the love feels necessary even when it cannot be acted upon. It serves as a messenger rather than a destination. The pain associated with it does not arise because love exists, but because the individual expects love to always seek expression in the outer world. When this expectation is challenged, suffering follows. Yet within that tension lies growth. The experience forces reflection, demanding that the individual ask why this love appeared and what inner truth it points toward. If approached with awareness, this love can lead to greater psychological maturity, teaching that not all emotions are meant to be fulfilled through action. Some exist to deepen understanding, reshape identity, and bring the individual closer to an honest relationship with their own inner life. When this love arises, it often feels unusually intense because it is not directed only toward the person in front of you, but towards something within yourself that has long remained unrecognized. The other becomes a surface onto which hidden qualities, unmet needs, and suppressed potentials are unconsciously placed. You may believe you are responding to who they are, yet much of what you feel belongs to an inner image that has been waiting for form. This is why the connection can feel profound, even without shared history or deliberate choice. The psyche seeks wholeness, and when it encounters someone who carries traits you have neglected or disowned, it reacts with powerful emotion. The love feels meaningful because it carries personal symbolism. It is not deception, but misrecognition. The heart responds honestly, yet the mind struggles to distinguish between the actual person and the inner figure they have awakened. This confusion is natural and deeply human. Over time, this kind of love invites discernment rather than action. As awareness grows, the individual may begin to see where imagination ends and reality begins. The realization can be painful, not because the feeling was false, but because it was incomplete. The other person was never meant to carry the full weight of your inner longing. They served as a catalyst, not a solution. When this is understood, the love does not vanish instantly, but it softens and changes shape. It becomes less about possession and more about insight. The emotional energy that once flowed outward can be redirected inward towards self-development and integration. In this way, the love fulfills its deeper purpose. It helps reclaim parts of the self that were projected outward, allowing the individual to grow more whole, grounded, and emotionally honest. What once felt like an impossible attachment becomes a meaningful inner turning point, leaving behind clarity rather than regret. The suffering connected to this love does not originate from the feeling itself, but from the conflict it creates with the structure of one's life. The heart responds naturally, yet the external world offers limits that cannot be ignored. Responsibilities, commitments, values, and consequences stand in quiet opposition to the emotion, creating an inner tension that feels relentless. This is where pain takes form. Love, when allowed to exist inwardly, carries warmth and meaning, but when it demands expression where expression is not possible, it turns into distress. The individual may mistake this pain as proof that the love is wrong, when in truth it is the friction between inner truth and outer reality that causes the ache. The psyche is caught between honoring feeling and preserving integrity, and neither side can be dismissed without cost. As this tension continues, the individual is forced into a deeper understanding of emotional responsibility. The question is no longer whether the love is real, but how it can be carried without harm. This requires restraint, not as suppression, but as conscious containment. To hold love without acting upon it is one of the most demanding psychological tasks because it asks the individual to tolerate longing without relief. Yet within this endurance lies transformation. The pain becomes a teacher, refining emotional awareness and strengthening inner boundaries. Over time, the love may lose its urgency, not because it was denied, but because it was understood. The individual learns that some loves are not meant to alter life externally, but to shape character internally. What remains is not bitterness, but a quiet respect for the depth of feeling and the wisdom gained by choosing wholeness over impulse. This love often appears at moments when the inner life is ready for change, even if the conscious mind resists it. It does not arrive to disrupt life without purpose, but to signal that something within the individual has remained underdeveloped or unheard. The person who evokes this love becomes a symbol rather than a goal, representing qualities, values, or ways of being that the individual has not fully lived. This is why the experience feels strangely meaningful, as though it carries a message beyond personal attraction. The psyche uses relationship as a language, and through this love it speaks about imbalance, stagnation, or forgotten aspirations. What seems like emotional chaos is often a call toward growth, urging the individual to examine what part of themselves seeks expression through another. If this symbolic nature is recognized, the love can be approached with reflection rather than urgency. Instead of asking how to pursue it, the more honest question becomes what it reveals. The intensity then shifts from outward longing to inward inquiry. The individual may begin to see how this love highlights inner contradictions, unfulfilled creative energy, or a desire for deeper authenticity. When these insights are accepted, the person who once held such emotional power gradually releases their hold, not through rejection, but through understanding. The love completes its task by awakening awareness. It leaves behind a clearer sense of direction and a renewed relationship with the self. What once felt like an impossible situation transforms into a meaningful inner passage, marking the moment when unconscious material was brought into conscious life and integrated with care. When this love is resisted or pushed away, it rarely disappears. Instead, it intensifies in quieter and more persistent ways. Suppression does not dissolve emotion, it merely relocates it to deeper layers of the inner world where it gathers strength. The individual may believe they have moved on, yet the feeling returns through dreams, sudden memories, or an unexplainable emotional pull. This is not weakness, but a natural psychological response. What is denied does not vanish. It seeks expression through symbols and imagination. The mind attempts control, but the inner life operates by different laws. Resistance turns the love into an internal presence, making it feel larger than life precisely because it is no longer allowed to be seen clearly. The effort to forget becomes an ongoing struggle, draining energy and creating inner conflict. What was once a feeling becomes a fixation, not because it was too strong, but because it was never understood. When the individual shifts from resistance to acknowledgement, the dynamic begins to change. To recognize the love without acting upon it is not surrender, but mastery. By allowing the feeling to exist consciously, without judgment or fantasy, its emotional charge gradually softens. The psyche no longer needs to exaggerate it to gain attention. Understanding replaces obsession, and clarity replaces inattention. The individual learns that awareness is more effective than suppression, and honesty more healing than control. This love then becomes part of the inner landscape rather than a force that disrupts it. It teaches patience, emotional literacy, and respect for the boundaries between inner truth and outer action. In this way, what once felt overwhelming becomes manageable and meaningful. The love loses its urgency not because it was defeated, but because it was finally met with consciousness, allowing the individual to reclaim inner balance and psychological freedom. This love challenges the individual to examine what they truly seek when they say they love. Often, beneath the emotion lies a desire to possess, to secure, or to complete oneself through another. When fulfillment is not possible, this illusion is exposed. The individual is forced to confront whether the love is rooted in understanding or in need. This distinction becomes unavoidable when action is restrained. Without the ability to claim or merge, the feeling must stand on its own. In this stillness, the nature of the love reveals itself. If it is driven by lack, it becomes restless and painful. If it is grounded in understanding, it evolves into quiet appreciation and respect. This moment becomes a test of emotional maturity, separating impulse from intention and attachment from genuine care. As this realization deepens, the individual may begin to experience a different quality of love, one that does not demand reciprocity or outcome. It becomes an inner stance rather than an external pursuit. The focus shifts from what can be gained to what can be learned. The person who once felt central to the emotion is now seen more clearly, not as an object of fulfillment, but as a fellow human being with their own limits and path. This clarity allows compassion without entitlement. The love remains, but it no longer seeks to alter reality to survive. Instead, it coexists with acceptance. Through this process, the individual develops a deeper relationship with their own emotional life, learning that love can exist without possession and meaning without union. What emerges is not loss, but a more grounded and humane understanding of connection itself. To live with this love without acting upon it requires a level of inner strength that is rarely recognized. It demands the ability to carry emotion without seeking immediate relief and to remain faithful to one's values while feeling deeply. This is not passive endurance, but active psychological work. The individual must continually choose awareness over impulse, reflection over fantasy. Each day becomes an exercise in emotional balance, where longing is acknowledged but not obeyed. This process can feel isolating because it takes place largely within the inner world, unseen by others. Yet it is here that character is formed. The love becomes a silent companion, shaping patience, humility, and self-respect. Rather than weakening the individual, this restraint gradually strengthens the inner foundation, creating a sense of dignity rooted in conscious choice. As time passes, the love begins to change form. It no longer dominates thought or disturbs inner peace. Instead, it integrates into the broader emotional landscape, losing its sharp edges. The individual discovers that they can honor feeling without being controlled by it. This realization brings a quiet confidence, the knowledge that one can experience depth without losing direction. The love has fulfilled its role by teaching endurance and self-trust. It leaves behind an expanded capacity to hold complexity, to accept contradiction, and to remain whole even when life does not resolve itself neatly. What once felt like an unbearable burden becomes a source of inner maturity, proving that strength is not found in acting on every emotion, but in understanding which emotions are meant to be lived inwardly. In the end, this love reveals its true purpose not through fulfillment, but through transformation. It does not remain in the psyche to torment indefinitely, nor does it demand resolution in the outer world. Instead, it quietly redirects the individual inward, toward a deeper encounter with the self. What once appeared as longing for another is gradually recognized as a call toward inner completeness. The love exposes gaps in self-understanding, neglected emotional needs, and unlived aspects of identity. By bringing these elements into awareness, it initiates a process of inner reconciliation. The individual begins to see that the intensity of the feeling was proportional to the depth of what needed to be known. This realization reframes the experience, shifting it from loss to meaning. The love no longer feels accidental or cruel, but purposeful in a way that only becomes clear with reflection. As this insight settles, the individual moves closer to psychological wholeness. The emotional energy that was once bound to an impossible situation is now available for inner growth, creativity, and conscious living. The love completes its journey not by disappearing, but by dissolving into understanding. It leaves behind a stronger sense of self, one less dependent on external validation and more rooted in inner truth. The person learns that not every profound emotion is meant to shape destiny through action. Some are meant to shape the soul through awareness. This love, once carried with confusion and restraint, becomes a quiet marker of inner evolution. It stands as proof that meaning can arise even from what cannot be lived outwardly, and that the deepest connections sometimes guide us not toward another person, but toward ourselves. When this love has completed its inner task, what remains is not attachment, but a refined awareness of oneself in relation to others. The individual no longer approaches connection with urgency or fantasy, but with a grounded sense of presence. Having witnessed how easily emotion can arise from unconscious material, they become more attentive to their inner motives. Love is no longer confused with rescue, escape, or completion. This awareness brings a quiet sobriety to future relationships, not as cynicism but as clarity. The individual understands that genuine connection begins where projection ends. This knowledge does not diminish feeling, it purifies it. There is greater respect for boundaries, both one's own and those of others. The psyche, having learned through intensity, now seeks balance. What once overwhelmed now informs. The love that could not be lived outwardly becomes an inner reference point, guiding discernment and emotional honesty. With this integration, the individual steps into a more authentic way of relating to life itself. They no longer fear strong emotions, nor do they rush to act upon them. Instead, they listen. Emotional experience becomes a source of information rather than command. This capacity marks a deep psychological shift where the individual is no longer driven by unconscious patterns, but engaged in conscious participation with their inner world. The impossible love fades into the background, not as a regret, but as a completed chapter of inner development. It has done its work by sharpening awareness and deepening self-knowledge. What follows is not emptiness, but readiness. Readiness for relationships rooted in reality, for choices made with integrity, and for a life guided not by impulse, but by understanding. In this way, the love that was never meant to happen fulfills its purpose fully, leaving the individual more whole, grounded, and inwardly free. There comes a stage when the individual realizes that this love was never meant to be resolved, only understood. The mind stops searching for outcomes and begins to recognize patterns. What once felt personal now reveals a universal structure of the inner life, where emotions arise not to be satisfied, but to inform consciousness. The love no longer asks questions such as what could have been or what was lost. Instead, it invites reflection on how the individual has changed by carrying it. The emotional charge diminishes as insight grows. The person sees that the love appeared precisely because the psyche was ready to confront deeper truths about attachment, expectation, and identity. This recognition brings relief, not through forgetting, but through comprehension. The experience becomes integrated into the narrative of the self as a necessary inner passage rather than an unresolved mistake. With this understanding, the individual gains a quieter, steadier relationship with their emotional world. They no longer feel threatened by feelings that cannot be acted upon, nor do they rush to define themselves through relationship alone. Love is now approached with patience and depth, informed by the knowledge that not every feeling demands expression to be meaningful. This shift marks a subtle but profound form of inner freedom. The person is no longer divided between desire and duty, but able to hold complexity without inner fracture. The love that once felt impossible has fulfilled its final role by teaching discernment and self-trust. What remains is a grounded sense of being, where emotion and understanding coexist. The individual moves forward not hardened, but refined, carrying a deeper respect for the inner life and the quiet wisdom that emerges when one learns to listen rather than react. At a deeper level, this love reshapes the individual's relationship with solitude. What once felt like absence gradually becomes space. The individual learns to sit with themselves without distraction, without seeking another to resolve inner tension. This is not withdrawal from life, but a return to an internal center that had been overlooked. The love, once focused outward, now turns inward as attention. In this quiet space, the individual begins to hear their own thoughts more clearly and feel their own emotions without distortion. Solitude becomes less frightening because it is no longer empty. It is filled with awareness. The presence of the other is no longer needed to validate feeling. The individual discovers that depth does not depend on exchange but on honesty. This shift marks a turning point, where emotional independence replaces emotional dependence, not through denial, but through understanding. As this capacity grows, the individual carries themselves differently in the world. There is less urgency to be seen, chosen, or confirmed. Relationships are approached with calm openness rather than expectation. The love that once demanded attention now supports inner stability. It has refined perception, teaching the individual how to remain connected without losing themselves. This is not emotional detachment, but emotional balance. The person becomes capable of intimacy without projection and closeness without fear. The impossible love has completed another layer of its task by preparing the individual for healthier connection. It leaves behind a quieter confidence, one rooted not in certainty about others, but in trust in one's own inner ground. What remains is a sense of continuity within the self, where past emotion no longer pulls attention backward, but stands integrated as lived experience that has deepened awareness and strengthened inner coherence.